No good deed goes unpunished, especially when you live next to someone whose gratitude has a strict, unadvertised expiration date. You can spend months cultivating a neighborly peace, going out of your way to be helpful, only for a single afternoon of innocent joy to shatter the illusion. When the very people you've helped decide to weaponize local ordinances against your children, you are faced with a choice. You can take the high road, confront them with calm, rational dialogue, and hope they see the error of their ways. Or you can embrace the shadows, rely on the wonders of modern electronic hunting gear, and wage a covert psychological war that leaves absolutely zero evidence. I highly recommend the latter. Where I live, winter is not a season. It is a prolonged 8-month hostage situation. The cold here does not just bite, it gnaws at the bones, freezing the moisture in your nostrils the second you step off the porch. We spend the majority of the year bundled in layers of thermal wool, scuttling from our heated homes to our heated cars like fragile frostiverse insects. So, when late February surprisingly yields an afternoon where the thermometer breaks the freezing mark, the neighborhood undergoes a spontaneous metamorphosis. The slush softens, the blinding glare of the sun actually carries a hint of warmth, and cabin fever breaks with a joyous, chaotic release. Our property is a modest quarter-acre, flanked by narrow property lines and a towering, ancient elm tree that straddles the northern boundary. On this particular unseasonably warm afternoon, I practically shoved my 2 children, Rodri and Tamsin, out the back door. They had been bouncing off the drywall for weeks. Within minutes, the backyard transformed into a bustling construction site. They were rolling massive, lopsided boulders of heavy, wet snow, engineering a pair of rival fortresses. The air was thick with the wet thwack of snowballs impacting nylon winter coats and the shrill, unfiltered shrieks of childhood delight. They weren't the only ones taking advantage of the thaw. Over the southern fence, another set of kids had spilled into their yard, their laughter mingling with Rodri and Tamsin's in a loud, echoing crossfire. And on the northern side, pacing the perimeter of a chain-link fence, were Dagmar's 4 dogs. They were a mixed bag of terriers and hounds, currently losing their collective minds with excitement, barking, and tail-wagging at the commotion. It was loud, undeniably. It was the sound of life temporarily thawing out. I stood by the kitchen window with a mug of black coffee, watching the localized chaos, feeling a rare moment of suburban contentment. That contentment lasted exactly 34 minutes. The heavy crunch of boots on the gravel driveway broke my reverie. I peered through the front blinds to see a heavy-duty municipal pickup truck idling at the curb, its amber lights rotating lazily. Striding up the walkway was Calder, a city bylaw officer I happened to know from a weekend curling league. He looked entirely out of place in his high-visibility vest, clutching a clipboard with a deeply apologetic grimace plastered across his face. I opened the front door before he could knock, letting the crisp air spill into the hallway. "Calder," I said, leaning against the doorframe, "tell me you're just here to admire the snow forts." Calder sighed, his breath pluming in the chilly air. He gestured vaguely toward the clipboard. "I wish, mate, I really do, but I've got a dispatched noise complaint. Just had to come by and visually confirm you aren't running an unlicensed heavy metal festival or operating industrial jackhammers in the residential zone." I stared at him, blinking slowly. A noise complaint for kids playing in the snow at 2 in the afternoon. Calder chuckled, a dry, grating sound, and peeked around the side of the house toward the backyard. He watched Rodri take a slush ball directly to the shoulder and collapse in a fit of giggles. Calder shook his head, lowering his voice as he leaned in closer. "Look, I have to log the visit, but between you and me, crazy dog ladies shouldn't complain so much, especially when her own hounds are contributing half the decibels." He tapped his clipboard, gave a commiserating shrug, and trudged back to his truck. He never explicitly said Dagmar's name. Professional protocol dictated he keep the complainant anonymous, but he didn't have to. The implication hung in the frosty air, heavy and undeniable. I closed the door, the latch clicking shut with a sharp finality. A hot, prickling wave of irritation washed over the back of my neck. Dagmar, the woman who lived in the single-story bungalow to the north. Most of the time, she was a reclusive figure, emerging only to wrangle her chaotic pack of dogs. We knew she struggled with some health issues, and on her bad days she could be incredibly abrasive. But we had always given her a wide berth and an infinite reservoir of grace. The anger simmering in my chest wasn't just about the sheer audacity of calling municipal law enforcement on children laughing. It was the sting of betrayal. Just 3 months prior, Dagmar had slipped on a patch of black ice and shattered her ankle. She had been housebound, hobbling around on crutches, completely unable to manage the heavy snowdrifts burying her driveway. For 6 weeks, Rodri and Tamsin had taken it upon themselves to clear her property. Every time the plows buried the end of her driveway in a wall of compacted ice, my kids were out there with their bright plastic shovels, hacking away at it until her path was clear. I didn't ask them to do it, they just did. Furthermore, Tamsin, who possessed a heart entirely too soft for this world, regularly spent her meager weekly allowance on premium liver snaps, passing them through the chain-link fence to Dagmar's dogs. My children had been her unpaid, pint-sized groundskeepers and canine caterers. And her repayment was an attempt to slap us with a municipal citation the moment they dared to make a sound in their own yard. I paced the length of the living room, gripping my phone. My first instinct was to march over there, hammer on her weather-beaten door, and demand an explanation. But logic quickly overrode the impulse. Confronting Dagmar directly was a losing game. When her mood swung low, or when she was off her prescribed medications, she became irrational, combative, and prone to playing the victim. A screaming match over the fence would only escalate tensions, potentially leading to a toxic, prolonged neighborhood war. No, a frontal assault was tactically unsound. What I needed was an asymmetrical approach. I needed a method of retaliation that was invisible, untraceable, and devastatingly annoying. That evening, after the kids were asleep and the house had settled into a quiet, creaking stillness, I opened my laptop. I navigated to a sporting goods website, bypassing the camping gear and fishing tackle, and clicked into the hunting section. It took me less than 20 minutes to find exactly what I was looking for, the Predator Pro 5000. It was a high-fidelity, weather-resistant electronic animal collar, primarily used by hunters to lure coyotes, foxes, and bobcats into the open. It came with a long-range wireless remote, capable of triggering pre-recorded wildlife vocalizations from over 100 yards away. I paid the extra $18 for expedited overnight shipping. 2 days later, a discreet brown cardboard box arrived on my porch. I unpacked the device on my kitchen island. It was a rugged, dark green speaker, roughly the size of a coffee can, equipped with a heavy-duty mounting strap. I tested the remote, scrolling through the digital display, distressed rabbit, aggressive bobcat, lone coyote howl. I smiled. The trap was set, now I just needed the cover of darkness. I waited until 1 in the morning. The neighborhood was dead, buried under a heavy, oppressive silence. The temperature had plummeted back down to a brutal 15 degrees. I pulled on my thickest parka, slipped a pair of heavy-duty zip ties into my pocket, and grabbed the green speaker. I slipped out the back door, my boots crunching softly on the frozen crust of the snow. I navigated toward the northern property line, my eyes fixed on the massive elm tree. Its thick, gnarled branches stretched over both my yard and Dagmar's roof. Climbing a tree in the dead of winter, wearing a bulky winter coat and insulated gloves, is an exercise in miserable, sweaty exertion. The bark was slick with a thin veneer of rime ice. I hoisted myself up, scraping my knee against the rough trunk, hauling my weight into the lower canopy. I climbed about 15 feet up, finding a sturdy fork in the branches that offered a clear, unobstructed line of sight directly to Dagmar's bedroom window, which was situated just beneath the eaves of her house. My fingers were going numb, fumbling clumsily in the dark as I strapped the speaker tight against the wood. I reinforced it with the heavy-duty zip ties, making sure the device was completely camouflaged against the dark bark. I angled the speaker cone precisely, ensuring the acoustics would bounce directly off the siding of her house. I climbed down, panting, my breath forming thick white clouds in the freezing air. I retreated to the warmth of my house, locked the back door, and placed the small black remote on my nightstand, right next to a glass of water. The human biological clock is a remarkably consistent mechanism. I am a man in my late 30s, which means without fail my bladder summons me from the depths of sleep somewhere between 2 and 3 in the morning. That night my eyes snapped open. The digital clock on the dresser glowed red. 2:14 a.m. The house was utterly silent, save for the low hum of the furnace kicking on in the basement. I threw off the heavy duvet, my bare feet hitting the icy hardwood floor. I walked to the adjoining bathroom, handled my business in the dark to avoid waking my wife, and padded back into the bedroom. I paused beside the nightstand. My fingers brushed the cool plastic of the remote. I picked it up, my thumb hovering over the activation button. The digital screen faintly illuminated the setting, Track 4 Alpha Coyote Territorial Howl. I walked over to the bedroom window, which faced the northern property line. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, looking out at the darkened silhouette of Dagmar's house. I pressed the button. For a second, nothing happened. Then, cutting through the dead, frigid silence of the winter night, an ungodly sound erupted from the canopy of the elm tree. It was a high-pitched, warbling shriek that descended into a long, guttural, echoing howl. The audio fidelity of the Predator Pro 5000 was terrifyingly impressive. It sounded exactly as if a massive, hungry apex predator was standing on Dagmar's roof, challenging the moon. The howl lasted for perhaps 6 seconds. I clicked the remote again, cutting the audio feed instantly. Silence slammed back down over the neighborhood. I held my breath, waiting. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3, then the explosion. Even through the double-paned glass of my window, across 20 feet of open air, and through the insulated walls of Dagmar's house, I heard it. 4 indoor dogs, triggered by the primal genetic terror of a nearby predator, went absolutely, undeniably ballistic. It wasn't just barking. It was a frantic, panicked cacophony of deep, booming roars and high-pitched, hysterical yapping. I could hear the muffled thud of heavy paws scrabbling against hardwood floors, the chaotic scratching at doors, the sheer pandemonium of a canine pack preparing to defend their territory from an invisible intruder. A moment later, a dull yellow light snapped on behind Dagmar's drawn blinds. I could faintly hear a muffled, raspy voice, Dagmar, jolted from a deep sleep, shouting in a desperate, futile attempt to quiet the deafening riot occurring in her hallway. The dogs did not care. Their primal instincts had been activated, and they were committed to barking until the threat was neutralized. I stood by the window in the dark, watching the chaotic flickering of shadows against her blinds, listening to the muffled chaos. A slow, deeply satisfying smile spread across my face. I placed the remote back on the nightstand, climbed into bed, pulled the heavy duvet up to my chin, and closed my eyes. The faint, rhythmic sound of 4 dogs losing their minds next door was the perfect lullaby. This became our new routine. Every single night, between 2 and 3 in the morning, biology would wake me. I would get up, use the restroom, pick up the remote, and trigger a 6-second blast from the elm tree. Sometimes I varied the tracks. A distress call on a Tuesday, a territorial bark on a Thursday. The result was always the same. An immediate, explosive riot of indoor barking, followed by the muffled, frantic shouting of a woman abruptly torn from her slumber. I never brought it up. When I saw Dagmar a week later, hobbling out to retrieve her mail, she looked utterly exhausted. Dark, heavy bags hung beneath her eyes, her hair was disheveled, and she carried the distinct aura of a woman who hadn't slept a full night in days. I offered her a polite, neighborly wave. She just glared at me, too tired to even muster a scowl, and retreated back into her bunker. She never filed another noise complaint against my children. In fact, she barely opened her windows at all once the spring thaw finally arrived. She remained trapped in a prison of her own making, held hostage by her own ungrateful hounds and an invisible, phantom coyote that only seemed to hunt at 2 in the morning. There is a profound lesson hidden in the branches of that icy elm tree. Community relies on a delicate balance of tolerance and mutual respect. When you willingly accept the kindness of others, when you let children clear your heavy snow and feed your restless animals, you forfeit the right to demand silence from them. The moment you weaponize authority against innocence, you invite a different kind of justice. It's a justice that doesn't wear a badge or carry a clipboard. It's a justice that operates in the dead of night, runs on AAA batteries, and ensures that those who refuse to let others live in peace will never, ever sleep in peace again. If you've ever had a neighbor push you past the breaking point, or if you simply appreciate the fine art of invisible, untraceable retribution, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment below and tell me the most petty length you've gone to in order to settle a score. And remember, the next time you hear a wild howl in the dead of night, it might just be the sound of karma, operated by remote control.